we hear the words of the Lord this morning and those he encounters. May it be us. Matthew 21, beginning with verse 23. Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you this authority?" Jesus replied, "I will also ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or from men?" They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men, we are afraid of the people, for they all hold that John was a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Then he said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." What do you think? There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go and work today in the vineyard." "I will not," he answered, but later he changed his mind and he went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing, and he answered, "I will, sir," but he did not go. Which of the 2 did what his father wanted? "The first," they answered. Jesus said to them, "I tell you the truth, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of heaven ahead of you. For John came to you to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe him." As I get older, I have flashbacks to former times in my life. So maybe we don't want to get older because we might remember more the more years we've been on this earth. But I remember back when I was a high school student. That's been a while. And it was the last day of school before Christmas break. And I'm going to get a little confessional this morning, so I hope I don't break any positive images about me, but here goes. That last day before Christmas break, I tested authority by, and I know you probably could never imagine this, but by smoking a cigarette, oh no, right in front of my high school that morning before class. Now, to be fair, I wasn't the only one out there. There were at least a dozen of us out on that sidewalk smoking cigarettes before class. And after all, we figured it was hopefully okay. It's a public sidewalk. It was a haunt of teenage smokers, all of us who thought at least we were cool at Crawford High School. But it was also the day that our mean vice principal, Mr. Urban, decided that he would assert his power and authority. And so he came out of the office, which was right there nearby the opening of the school, not too far from the sidewalk where we were standing. We might not have been the smartest students on the block because we were pretty close to Mr. Urban's office, and he came out there and he hauled us all into his office that winter morning. The school phones were jammed as parent after parent called and was told to come and pick up your son or pick up your daughter, and that we were all going to get suspended from school that day, the day before Christmas break. Well, I was one of those students. Now, the truth is, of course, I tested Mr. Urban's authority and lost. But, sir, I pleaded, sir, after all, I was smoking, yes, but it's on a public sidewalk. It's not school property. Well, what do you think the vice principal said to that? Well, you know it. Do you think he listened? Do you think he cared? Do you think that changed the fact that I was about to get suspended? No. I'm reminded of an old song by the Bobby Fuller Four that was popular in 1966, so that dates some of us. I tested the law, and the law won. Remember that song? I could almost sing it, but we're not supposed to sing. I tested the law, and the law won, it goes. I guess that song seems to reverberate when I think of this incident in my life where I did something that was dumb and stupid and I shouldn't have done it, and I knew better. That day before Christmas break in 1970, I tested the authority, and the authority won over my feeble excuses, my know-it-all swagger at age 18 in high school. I should have known better. Did I get suspended? As I should have? Well, I got an early Christmas present that year. Mr. Urban only suspended a few students that day. I was one of the lucky ones. I've never felt so grateful in all my life, because I would have been in big trouble, not just at school, which I was, but also at home. I got a reprieve, I got a pardon because, I guess, although Mr. Urban never told us, that it was Christmas season. Now, that's just an account out of my life about me testing authority. You probably have one of your own, or many of your own if you're like me. The question is, of course, who has authority over our lives? Does anybody or anything, do we recognize any authority over us? I mean, here in America, we think of ourselves as being free and independent, and we can pretty much do a lot of things that we want to do, and I think authority is kind of a distant notion to us. I don't know, but that's how we're used to operating, I suppose. Authority is, of course, something or someone having power over us, telling us what to do, how to live, what to think, what to say, how to act. That's authority. Sometimes it's persuasion, sometimes it's force, sometimes it's coercion, sometimes it's the law. If you've ever been stopped by an officer of the law, you've felt his or her authority. Sometimes authority and recognition of authority is just voluntary compliance. We do things because it's right. It's proper, which I didn't do that day in high school. Authority. Our scripture today reveals the ever-present continuing battle of authority in human life. Human beings often against God. So I go to verse 23. Now, of course, the setting is that Jesus, this is the last week of his life. The last few days, it's probably Wednesday. Of course, Thursday would be the day that they were busy preparing for Passover and the Last Supper. So, not a lot of time left in Jesus' life, but we can see in verse 23, he's teaching in the temple. He's trying to bring in the kingdom, and before these final hours and last couple of days, he's trying people to bring to himself so they can have the love, experience the love of God, bring into the kingdom. Verse 23, Jesus enters the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and the elders of the people came up to him, and this is what they asked: "By what authority are you doing these things, Jesus?" They asked, and Then to repeat the authority part, and who gave you this authority? Okay. The elders of the Jews, the chief priests, they're the ones, of course, that are controlling the temple and everything. They control everything that happens in Jerusalem and everything, especially that happens in the temple where Jesus comes to teach. And almost certainly they don't believe who Jesus really is. They don't believe he's the Son of God. They don't want to believe he's the Son of God. In other words, they refuse to recognize that Jesus or God has any authority. Their God is a God they've made up with lots of rules and rituals. And the true God is really staring at them in the face, Jesus Christ, and they can't see it because they don't want to, because they don't want to live under divine authority. And I think that's the lesson here, as Jesus tries to show them the right way. Now, if I step up and tell you everything you must believe, everything you must say, think, know, and do, and where you can go to church and how you can worship and what true worship is, and the whole ball of wax, if I were to lay out all that weight of authority, you'd probably tell me where to go. You'd probably say, hey, there's the front door. See you later. That's kind of what Jesus is doing here. And the very religious leaders who should know better, what are they doing? They're refusing to recognize that Jesus has any authority. Sound familiar? I mean, that's what's happening in the world today, isn't it? They don't want to recognize Jesus, who he is. He has no credibility in their eyes and their heart. He has no credentials. He has no decree from any school. He's a nobody from Galilee. But the problem is, as it is today, that Jesus, of course, is claiming to be God. What are we going to do when we hear that ourselves? What did they do? They refused to believe. Could that happen? Well, could we as human beings, refuse to believe that there's a God? Or that God, if there is a God, that he sent his Son? That's still the description of the Jews today. They refuse to believe that God has sent his Son. And he's right here before them in the temple. And to this day it's so sad they still don't recognize his authority. And Jesus says to them, you ignored me and my authority, but before that you ignored. This is the second chance, see? The first chance was when John the Baptist proclaimed that Jesus was coming, get ready, and then he's here. And they refused to see Jesus or John when John was saying, Jesus is coming, he's the very Son of God, he has all the authority, get ready, be prepared before it's too late. And now Jesus is saying this question about John. Will these scribes and Pharisees, do they recognize who John is? And they're afraid to answer because they know that any way they answer, since they never recognized any of God's authority in John and now in Jesus, that they're going to be condemned, and they're the spiritual guides of Israel. Any parallels with today? With authority? God's authority? Well, of course there are. When we see in verse 25, Matthew says, Jesus used this word from heaven. John was from heaven. Where does the source, the place of all authority, where do we look to? Where do we need to set our lives, the priority and agendas of our life and our heart? We need to have a heavenly agenda, a heavenly will within us. And that's what Jesus is saying, that John was from heaven. Another way of saying that he had the authority of God, and Jesus saying, you should have listened to John, but you didn't listen to John. And so why will you listen to me? Jesus knows that they won't listen. And of course Jesus knows that they are the very ones that will condemn him to death. Kind of a sad commentary about people who don't want anything to do with Jesus Christ. And the sad commentary is it's still that way today. Right? So Jesus tells the parable about two sons. He is still knocking on the door of their hearts, trying to get in, trying to get them to find the truth that they're supposed to proclaim. And he talks about these two sons who were asked to go out and work. Lots of work yesterday. And it's about what they did when they were asked to go work. One lied and said he'd recognize and do the Father's authority and will, and he would go to work. And the other son, was honest. He said, no, I won't go to work.